Today on Your Government in Action, where we cover bills, votes, records, and how it affects you. He voted against disaster relief for other states, then asked for it for his own, and the record shows exactly how it happened. Ted Cruz is a United States Senator from Texas. He has been one of the most polarizing figures in American politics since the day he arrived in Washington. His supporters call him a constitutional warrior who tells hard truths. His critics call him an opportunist who bends principles when it is convenient. Both sides point to the same events to make their case. This is his record. Source: ProPublica Congress API and Congress.gov. To understand Ted Cruz, you have to start with where he came from. Rafael Edward Cruz was born on December 22, 1970, in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. His father, Rafael Cruz, was a Cuban immigrant who fled the Castro regime. His mother, Eleanor Dara, was an American citizen born in Delaware. Because his mother was American, Cruz was a natural-born citizen under U.S. law, though that question did come up briefly during the 2016 presidential campaign. He grew up in Texas after his family moved there when he was 4 years old. Cruz attended Princeton University, where he graduated with honors in 1992 with a degree in public policy. From there, he went to Harvard Law School, one of the most selective law programs in the country. Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, who has worked with law students across decades, described Cruz as one of the smartest students he ever had. Cruz graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Law in 1995. After law school, Cruz clerked for federal judges, including a clerkship for Chief Justice William Rehnquist of the United States Supreme Court. Clerking for a Supreme Court justice is one of the most competitive positions in the legal profession. A typical year produces fewer than 40 Supreme Court clerks nationwide. Cruz then worked in private practice and at the Federal Trade Commission before returning to Texas. From 2001 to 2003, he served as director of the Office of Policy Planning at the FTC. Then in 2003, he was appointed Solicitor General of Texas, the state's top appellate attorney. In that role, he argued 9 cases before the United States Supreme Court, winning several on Second Amendment rights, the Pledge of Allegiance, and other constitutional questions. That record made him a rising star in conservative legal circles well before he ran for Senate. In 2012, he ran for the U.S. Senate and won, defeating a sitting lieutenant governor in the Republican primary and going on to win the general election. He took office in January of 2013. Now let's look at how Cruz has actually voted on the issues that matter to Texans. Cruz has one of the most consistently conservative voting records in the Senate. Let's go through the major areas one by one. On government spending, Cruz voted against the Hurricane Sandy relief bill in January of 2013. That bill provided $50.5 billion in aid to New York and New Jersey after the storm devastated the region in October of 2012. Cruz was among 36 senators who voted no. His stated reason was that the bill was padded with spending unrelated to Sandy relief. He pointed to provisions he said had nothing to do with the disaster. Independent analysts noted the bill did contain some items critics called unrelated. Those supporters argued they were legitimate disaster preparedness costs. The vote passed anyway, and the aid went to the affected states. Then, in February of 2021, Winter Storm Uri slammed Texas. The storm knocked out power for millions of Texans during temperatures well below freezing. 246 people died. Cruz flew to Cancun, Mexico, with his family during the crisis. Photos of him at the airport circulated widely. He returned to Texas within roughly 36 hours. Cruz said publicly that the trip was his daughter's idea and that he had flown with them to get them to safety, calling it a mistake that he regrets. After the storm, the state of Texas formally requested federal disaster relief, and Cruz supported that request. Critics pointed out the contrast with his Sandy vote. On healthcare, Cruz voted against the Affordable Care Act's expansion and was a leading voice in the push to repeal it. He also voted against the bipartisan gun safety bill in 2022 called the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which passed 55 to 45 with 15 Republican senators crossing over. On immigration, Cruz supported stricter border enforcement throughout his tenure and opposed the bipartisan border security bill that was negotiated in 2024. He also voted to acquit President Trump in both Senate impeachment trials. On military and veterans issues, Cruz voted in favor of the PACT Act in 2022, which expanded healthcare benefits for veterans exposed to toxic burn pits. That bill passed the Senate with broad bipartisan support. Cruz voted yes. Source: ProPublica Congress API. Some of Cruz's biggest moments came not from votes, but from fights he picked inside the Senate chamber itself. In September and October of 2013, Cruz was the central figure in a government shutdown that lasted 16 days. He delivered a 21-hour speech on the Senate floor in an attempt to block a government funding bill that also funded the Affordable Care Act. That speech included him reading Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss, which became one of the most watched moments of the episode. The shutdown cost the federal government an estimated $24 billion in lost economic activity, according to the rating agency Standard & Poor's. The ACA was not defunded. Cruz argued that the effort was necessary to force a public debate about the law. His Republican colleagues were divided. Some backed him. Others, including senior members of his own party, publicly criticized the tactic. Then came 2016. Cruz ran for president and finished second in the Republican primary, winning a larger share of delegates than any candidate except Donald Trump. He won 11 states and carried 306 delegates. In a primary with more than a dozen candidates, finishing second to the eventual nominee was a significant result. At the Republican National Convention in July of 2016, Cruz gave a primetime speech in which he declined to endorse Trump, telling viewers to vote their conscience. The crowd booed him off the stage. Cruz and Trump later reconciled, and Cruz endorsed Trump's campaigns in 2020 and 2024. On January 6 of 2021, Cruz was one of the senators who objected to the certification of Electoral College results from Arizona and Pennsylvania. He argued that the proper remedy was to form an electoral commission to conduct a 10-day audit of the disputed states. The objections were ultimately defeated in both chambers, and the results were certified. Cruz maintained that his objection was a legal and procedural argument, not an effort to overturn the election. Critics disagreed. On achievements, Cruz has been a consistent advocate for Second Amendment rights. He filed an amicus brief in the Heller case as Solicitor General of Texas, supporting the individual right to bear arms. The Supreme Court ruled 5-4 in favor of that position. He has also championed religious liberty cases and deregulation. His legal record from his time as Solicitor General is genuinely distinguished. That part of his biography is not disputed. Now let's look at who funds Ted Cruz's political operation. According to Federal Election Commission records and data compiled by Open Secrets, Ted Cruz is one of the most heavily funded senators in the country. The oil and gas industry has been among his top donor sectors throughout his Senate career. Texas is the largest oil and gas producing state in the nation, and Cruz has consistently opposed regulations on the energy industry. He voted against EPA rules on emissions, supported expanded drilling on federal lands, and opposed the Paris Climate Agreement. The financial sector has also been a major source of campaign contributions. Banks, investment firms, and private equity groups have contributed heavily to his campaign committees. Cruz has opposed financial regulations, including provisions of the Dodd-Frank Act, which was passed after the 2008 financial crisis. The law firm sector is another significant donor category. Cruz's legal background and his connections in the legal community have made him a favorite among attorneys and law firms, particularly those focused on conservative legal causes. Cruz has also raised money from ideologically motivated small donors, particularly during his 2016 presidential campaign. His digital fundraising operation was one of the most effective in the Republican field. He raised more than $80 million during that campaign. In total, his Senate and presidential campaigns have raised over $200 million since he entered public life. He is also connected to outside spending groups that operate independently of his campaign. Cruz has argued that campaign contributions are a form of free speech protected by the First Amendment. He has supported the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision. His critics argue that large donations from energy and finance create conflicts of interest when he votes on regulations affecting those industries. His supporters argue his positions reflect genuine ideology, not donor influence. The distinction is a matter of ongoing public debate. Source: Open Secrets FEC filings. Stepping back, here is how Ted Cruz's choices have stacked up against his own stated principles. Ted Cruz has built his entire political identity around a single core claim: that he is willing to fight when others will not, even when it costs him politically. That claim deserves to be tested against the record. On the Hurricane Sandy vote, Cruz said he voted no, because the bill was loaded with wasteful spending that had nothing to do with disaster relief. He named specific provisions he said were pork. His supporters accepted that explanation. His critics said that whatever the bill's flaws, blocking $50.5 billion in relief to suffering Americans was a choice with real human consequences. On the Cancun trip, Cruz has been more candid. He said publicly that he made a mistake. He said he should have stayed in Texas. He acknowledged that as a senator, he has limited direct operational authority over the power grid. But he also said the optics were bad, and he owns that. The power grid failure that caused the storm disaster falls under state authority in Texas, not federal authority. Cruz's office did make calls to federal officials requesting assistance while he was traveling. On January 6th, Cruz maintains that his objection to the Electoral College certification was a legal argument, not an attempt to overturn the election. He has pointed to historical instances of Democrats raising similar procedural objections after Republican victories. Critics say the context of January 6th was different. On consistency, one recurring theme in Cruz's career is tension between his stated principles and his political moves. He called Donald Trump a pathological liar and a sniveling coward during the 2016 primary. He later became one of Trump's most prominent Senate allies. When asked, Cruz has said the political situation changed and he responded to what his constituents wanted. His supporters call that pragmatism. His critics call it a flip. That tension is part of the public record, and voters in Texas have returned him to the Senate twice despite it. Sources: Congress.gov, ProPublica, and public statements by Senator Cruz. Ted Cruz graduated from Harvard Law, argued 9 cases before the Supreme Court, ran for president, led a government shutdown, flew to Cancun during a deadly Texas winter storm, and voted against disaster aid for other states before requesting it for his own. Whether you see him as a principled fighter or a self-serving politician, the record belongs to the public. These are the facts. Subscribe to Your Government in Action for more breakdowns like this.